Well, greetings and welcome to Chapter 2, Thinking Like an Economist. We can only hope not. All right. Well, to be upfront, I got to say, it is a study that has plenty of room for improvement. And I think that is probably one of the greatest areas of encouragement. I think if I'm sitting in your shoes, is that the possibilities are probably endless of the improvements that we could make on the models that we currently use. Are they absolutely worthless? No, by no means. Are they flawed? Absolutely. Can they be improved? Absolutely. And to me, boy, I'll tell you, you think about the impact you can make if you can come up with better models, um, more accurate models. Then you really can impact a lot of lives. So I'm really excited to share this idea with you of thinking like an economist. So underlying this whole thing is this idea of assumptions, and um, there's a cost of simplifying um, a very complex world. And when we do that, we get some very rough edges. And to me, um, things that I really am not, I don't think we should tolerate them as economists, but nevertheless, we do them anyways to simplify things that we can make assumptions and make general concepts and dogma. So economists make assumptions in order to make the world easier to understand and therefore to allow us to make these generalized ideas and propositions. So this idea, and I got to say, I think it's a real stretch. This idea of scientific, I think economists get carried away. They Mahalanobis back in the '50s, an Indian economist, world famous, had the whole Indian economy down to an equation, like one equation, the whole economy. You know what? We're humans. We have a lot of emotion. We have that je ne sais quoi, right? That element that is not a math equation, and we see that in markets. I mean, look at right now how much emotion is played into it, and so as a result, we get markets that have fat tails instead of the traditional bell curve. So some of these things that don't quite match the models, and so we get some problems from time to time. But nevertheless, we're doing well. We're trying to do the best we can. But like I said, plenty of room for improvement. Economists use different assumptions to answer different questions. First up, we're going to have some models that we're going to be talking about. So these general, um, I guess you could say, frameworks in which to fit these ideas that we're talking about. So economists use the models, once again, simplifying reality, and there's a cost to that, and that is inaccuracy, right? But to simplify so we can understand the world. And the first model that we're going to look at is this circular flow diagram. And the second will be the production possibilities graph. All right, so here it is. This is the circular flow. Now you'll notice this is a little different than Mankey's delivery of it. This is more traditional. You'll see that in ours, in this one at least, the product market's on top, factor market's on the bottom. Mankey refers to the product market as market for goods and services, and the factors of production. And he switches the two around. No big deal. It's just showing the same thing, it's just different. I like this because it's circular and it's a circular flow model, right? He's got a square, whatever. But for me, I like it. It's a circular flow. I want it to be a circular. And you'll notice there's two participants. So the two key elements here: who's participating? Households and firms. Where are they participating? In two markets: factor market and a product market. Okay. The households and firms, they own the land, labor, and capital, which we'll see here in just a minute. The firms, they buy, rent, lease the factors of production. Remember, the factors of production are the resources. Factors of production are the things that go into production: land, labor, capital. Remember, two types of capital: human capital, physical capital. So the firms are going to use the land, labor, and capital, but they're going to have to pay for it because the households own those things. So households own uh, rental properties, they own warehouses, and as a result, these businesses will lease those spaces from those households. You work, right? You have labor. You lease your labor. You rent your labor to wherever you work for. They give you what's called a factor payment in exchange for your labor, in the form of a paycheck. So it's the households that own the land, labor, and capital. They then exchange that land, labor, and capital down here, down here in the factor market, or the market for factors of goods and or market for factors of production. They're exchanging those to the firms. The firms are giving them factor payments in exchange for the land, labor, and capital. Well, up top here, at least in ours, the households are going to be buying for the products, sending money over here to the firms. The firms are going to be sending the goods and services back to the households. Now, remember, the firms need the land, labor, and capital in order to make the products, right? The factors of production. So what are they producing? Well, they need those factors of production to produce the goods and services. So you'll see it's a circular flow because you have monetary flow that's flowing. Households pay the firms, but the firms then also pay the households back. And the physical flow, well, the land, labor, and capital flow from the households to the firms, and the goods and services are flowing from the firms to the households. So it's this circular. So notice something here. What's important is they're interdependent. One is not without the other. So in other words, when you hear policies that attack one or the other, realize that if you affect one, if you're going to raise taxes on households, guess what? That means they're not going to have as much money to spend. That means the firms are going to get hurt. Firms get hurt. Well, guess what? That means they got to lay people off. They get to lay people off. Households get hurt, and we get this vicious cycle, right? Similarly, let's say you lower taxes on, we'll do it on the firms. Lower taxes on the firms have more money. Well, guess what? They can expand, they can buy more supplies, they can hire more labor. Well, guess what? Households have more money, households buy more stuff. That means firms need to hire more workers, in a virtuous circle. So the idea is that they're interdependent, and that's what we see here in this circular flow model, is the interdependency of households and firms. The two participants, households, firms, and the two markets, the market for goods and services and the factor market, according to Mankey, right? Now, for those of you that are thinking about the micro exam, this is a micro concept, and this is what microeconomics focuses on right here, this idea of the circular flow. So if you really want to simplify things and say, hey, what is micro? Well, micro is this. It's the circular flow diagram. All right. Just double checking here with you. So what are the three factors of production? And remember that those factors of production are the inputs, the things that go into the goods and services that the producers are producing. All right. So those inputs, land, labor, and capital, go into the stuff the cars you drive, everything in those terms. All right. Shifting gears here. All right. Production possibilities graph. So our first model, circular flow diagram. Second, and is this production possibilities graph, and it shows us a ton of stuff. It's pretty cool. And a matter of fact, we're going to see it later on applied in a much different way, but it's going to be the same thing, but it's going to look totally different. So it's the same thing, but you're going to see it differently. So it's super cool and important that you understand it now, because as it comes up later, it'll give you a greater understanding and those concepts that we tackle later, if you really get this. And remember that all this stuff that we're talking about is building a foundation. Think of it like a pyramid, right? If we get this foundation, all these fundamental concepts down, then as we build, it'll make sense. But if this is weak, we're going to have trouble as we build. So really get these concepts, okay? Production possibilities graph, once again, we're trying to find out what can we produce with our resources, trying to maximize our output efficiency, right? And remember, it's all based on this, the foundational level is scarcity. We have scarce resources, and because we have scarce resources, we have to make choices. And that's what economics is, the study of this choices that we make in dealing with these scarce resources. So production possibilities frontier is the line that shows the maximum possible output for the economy. We're going to see it. This whole graph shows a ton of stuff, right? But one of the key things you want to focus on is that frontier. The frontier shows maximum possible output for the economy. All right. So what are some of the things that we're going to see? We're going to see efficiency. We're going to see trade-offs. Hopefully you know what trade-offs are by now. Opportunity cost as well, all seen in this thing called the production possibilities graph. Economic growth, and we'll see what the importance is of economic growth as well. All right, so this is what it looks like. So we've got our production possibilities graph, and you'll notice that in this example, we have a plot of land. And on this plot of land, we can do one of two things or two of two things. We can take this plot of land and we could set all our resource, all the land, labor, and capital into the production of watermelon. Harvest, plant, cultivate, grow watermelon. Or we could pave the whole thing, put up a factory, and produce shoes instead. Or we could do some combination of the two. So we decide, being good Americans, we're going to pave the whole thing and put up a factory, okay? Because we want shoes. Oh, man. So notice our graph here. Notice that on the vertical, we have shoes, and on the horizontal, we have watermelon, okay? And over here in our chart, our schedule, we call it, if we put all our resources into shoes, all of it, nothing into watermelon, we can produce 15 million pairs of shoes. And we can graph that over here. 15 million pairs of shoes, 0 watermelon, right? Okay. Well, we decide, hey, you know what? Let's not put all of our resources into shoe production. Why don't we take the most fertile land, the most, productive land, and let's set that aside for watermelon. And you know what? Some of our workers aren't great at shoes, but you know what? Some of them are really good at growing watermelon. Let's take those highly productive watermelon growers, let's move them over along with this really quality land, and let's start producing watermelon. Now, that doesn't come free. There's a cost involved. We're giving up something in order to get those additional watermelon. And notice in our schedule here that we gain 8 million tons of watermelon. And now we're producing 14 million pairs of shoes. Notice we gain something, right? Remember we talked before about marginal benefit, marginal cost. Well, the additional benefit we got here, we got 8 million shoes, that tons of watermelon that we didn't have before, right? And now we had to give up 1 million pairs of shoes. So the opportunity cost, what we gave up, our next best alternative we gave up when we make a decision, our opportunity cost was 1 million pairs of shoes. And we see that graphically here as we move this direction to get our 8 million tons of watermelon, we actually dropped down vertically, didn't we? Down this way. So we gave up some shoes in order to get these watermelon. Well, you'll notice then now we start to say, wait, you know what? Let's move more of our land into the production of watermelon. Let's move more of our workers into the production of watermelon. Now, the land that we're getting for watermelon, not as good as the first, parcel of land that we had, but it still, yields a decent amount of watermelon. Those workers that now we're pulling off of shoes and moving over to watermelon, well, you know what? They're not as good at watermelon as that first, batch of people we sent over. Not quite as productive. Nevertheless, we move them into production of watermelon. And you'll notice now we get even more watermelon. Now we have 14 million tons of watermelon. But once again, there was a cost because those workers and that land is now being deployed to watermelon. We don't have the production of shoes. And as a result, we give up. Notice, in order to get that, we went from 8 to 14. Now we go from 14 million pairs of shoes to 12 million pairs of shoes. Ooh, now wait a second. Here, we've got 8 million tons of watermelon, and it only cost us 1 million pairs of shoes. Here, but the difference between 8 and 14 is 6. We gained 6. Here we gained 8. Now we're only getting 6. And guess what? Here it only cost us 1. Now it cost us 2. We got less, and it cost us more. Oh, wow. Now, as we shift more and more of those resources into the production of watermelon, look what happens. Now we go from 14 million watermelon to 18. We gained 4. Ooh, but not 6 and not 8. We're gaining less. And look what happened to the cost. The cost went up. Now, instead of costing us 2 here, it now costs us 3. And here it costs us 4. And to get the additional, it costs us 5. Notice that the opportunity cost is increasing. And recall that we talked previously that the idea that opportunity costs oftentimes increase. Sometimes they're the same. It's a constant opportunity cost. You get one, you give up, say 5. To gain one, you give up 5. To gain one, you give up 5. That's a constant opportunity cost. But in most things, we find that the opportunity cost increases the more that you want of the other good. So if we want more watermelon, it's going to cost us more and more in terms of shoes. All right. And remember that it's that increasing opportunity cost that leads to the curved. Notice the frontier here is curved. It is not a straight line. If the opportunity cost was a straight line, well, that would be because the opportunity cost was constant. A constant opportunity cost leads to a straight frontier, whereas an increasing opportunity cost leads to a convex or a curved frontier. And you can think of it this way, is the more we move this way, well, guess what? That cost increases, so we drop even further. To move the same amount to the right, it drops even further. And that gives us that curved line. So once again, we're seeing opportunity costs. We're seeing trade-off here, because remember, when we choose one thing, we have to give up other stuff. And as we do that, the opportunity cost is increasing as we choose more and more, in this case, of watermelon. All right, so we see efficiency. Efficiency is this frontier. The frontier, and remember, efficiency is when we're using our resources fully. We're not wasting any resources. We don't have workers that are sitting around doing nothing. We don't have materials that are not being deployed. We're fully maximizing our use of all our land, labor, and capital. And as a result, we're efficient, and we would be somewhere on this frontier, depending on how we choose to deploy those resources, right? So efficiency is shown by the production possibilities frontier. Now, if we're not being productive, if we're not efficient, if we are inefficient, then we're somewhere inside that frontier. So anywhere inside here is inefficient, or what we call underutilized. Inefficient or underutilized. All right? So look at all this we're seeing here just in this one graph. It's pretty cool. And I don't know about you, but I'm very visual. And what's that saying? 1,000 words, a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? The idea that we can see a ton of stuff just in this one little diagram. Growth. Now, growth is pretty amazing, and we may have not ever thought of it, but John D. Rockefeller, wealthiest person in probably in real terms. How much let's say a dollar bought back in 1900 versus how much a dollar buys in 2020, or even an income, right? I mean, beyond belief how wealthy, right? Wealthiest person, but yet you and I, we're average middle income, maybe upper middle income in some cases, but for the most part, we're middle income, maybe lower middle income. But for the most part, guess what? I mean, look at what we have. We have, remote control TV. We've got cruise control. We've got microwaves. We've got satellites. I mean, it's crazy all the things we have. But John D. Rockefeller had none of that. He barely even had like an indoor toilet, for crying out loud. You talk about our standard of living is so high compared to his. How is that possible? And the reason that is possible, that our standard of living is higher than the wealthiest person within the last 150 years, is because of this very idea of economic growth. Because of economic growth, because the economy has grown, we have more and more stuff for the number of people that we have. And as we have more and more stuff, our quality of life, in a material sense, but also in a very real sense, when you think about healthcare, and so forth, much better than it was 150 years ago, 120 years ago. So, economic growth, and you can see why government officials value economic growth to the point where they give us incentives. Copyrights, patents, these are basically monopolies. Well, monopoly's not good for a consumer. Why would they ever want to give a monopoly and hurt consumer? Well, because that monopoly, that patent that you get, is a pretty doggone good incentive for you to come up with some really cool new ideas. If you come up with new cool ideas, guess what? That's new technology. We get more productive, and the frontier moves out. So, once again, growth being a really, really big deal. So, if more resource, and we get that growth, we get a couple ways. One is if we get more resources. So, let's say we start these asteroids. They're talking about mining, asteroids. They start mining asteroids. Guess what? What happens to the frontier? Moves out. We got new stuff we didn't have before, right? New, let's say, natural gas find. Was the Leviathan find in the Mediterranean. A lot more natural gas. What happens? Price of natural gas goes down. Guess what? We can do more with natural gas. So my point is, one way to get that economic growth is through more resources. And just a side note, U.S., one thing we have had for literally since the beginning of time, except for a couple of years, we've had net immigration into our country. That is that's a resource. We have more labor. And as a result, the frontier moves out. So, this immigration thing is actually really good for our country. Okay. And the second way, besides resources, is technology. And technology is massively huge. And that is the primary reason why we've seen economic growth in our country for such a long time. All right. So here's a production possibilities frontier. What do you think? Let's see. All right. What we have, okay. What we've got here, we've got computers being produced on the vertical, cars on the horizontal. And in one case, let's say where we choose to have all cars, no computers. We're going to get 1,000 cars. Do you see that down here? Okay, that's going to be 1,000 cars. I'm going to try this. Let's see if it works. Let's just try it for giggles. Let's just try. Ooh, yeah, I like it. So, yeah, we end up with all cars and no computers. Well, what happens if we do the other? Let's put all our resources into computers and no cars. Well, we get 3,000 computers and we don't get any cars, right? Or we could then, move those resources, around, and we could get somewhere we're producing somewhere, in this general area. Once again, maximizing the resources, right? We're on the frontier, we're efficient. All right. That was fun. That was really fun. Okay, now this is important. You a very good chance you'll see this on the AP exam. What we're seeing here is there was something that made us more efficient or productive in the production of computers. It might have been, a better way of, cheaper materials. It might have been a new, production process that made it more efficient. But whatever it was, it applied only to the computers and did not apply to the production of automobiles. So what we see is that the frontier moves, in this case, further away from the origin for computers, but it doesn't move away for cars because of the technology or resource or whatever it might have been only is applying to computers and not for cars. And so the frontier, you'll notice, moves on the vertical axis, but doesn't change on the horizontal. All right. If you would highlight or read chapter 3, and you want to do you guys did a great job on the outlines last time. Do that again if you would, and that's the homework. You also want to check the classwork page for any additional That might be on.